Hi, this is Deb Wanger. Today we're going to be talking about broadcast writing. So in broadcast writing, there are essentially 5 key characteristics that I want you to be aware of. The first one is writing for the ear. So even if we are talking about writing to video, we're still talking about writing for the ear. And why is that? Because by and large, people typically get just one chance to hear what you say. There are very few people that are going to be recording a newscast and rewinding to hear what you had to say a second or third time. So when we write in text, obviously there's the possibility that somebody could go back and reread if something's not clear. So for that reason, when we say writing for the ear, we're really talking about writing in a very clear, easily understood manner. To do that, you also need to read what you've written out loud. If you ever go into a broadcast newsroom, it could be a little odd at first to see all these people apparently reading to themselves. Well, what they're doing is they're reading their own scripts as they're writing them to make sure that it sounds good, that they're actually communicating effectively if somebody's only able to hear what they're saying. The second characteristic is to be conversational. So of course this is related to writing for the ear. You want to make language as simple as possible and avoid jargon. Sometimes you hear the term inside baseball. So if you're offering up so many statistics and details that only a true expert could understand, then you really haven't done your job as a broadcast writer. So if somebody says something to you using terminology that only they will typically understand, you need to act as sort of a translator for the audience. So let's say someone says, yeah, we're sending out a hazmat team. Well, if you've been in a newsroom long enough, you know that hazmat team is short for hazardous materials team, but it's unlikely that your audience is going to know that. So you need to say in your copy, police sent out a team trained in handling potentially hazardous materials. That's going to be much more useful to the audience than using the lingo that your interview source might use. So the third characteristic of good broadcast writing is to write in future or present tense. Of course, broadcast is all about immediacy. That's one of the real strengths of the medium, that you can report on something within seconds or certainly within minutes of it happening. So in order to write in future or present tense, you really have to ask yourself 2 questions when you sit down to write a broadcast lead. The first is, what can I say is happening right now? Or what can I say about what will happen in the future or what's likely to happen in the future? So let's take the example of a fire at the student union. Let's say today the student union has a fire that wipes out the dining area. So tomorrow, if I'm writing a story about it, I can still put that in present or future tense by knowing what's happening now or what's expected to happen. So certainly if there's a big fire at the union and it wipes out the food court, you know that there's still going to be cleanup going on. You know that the officials will be talking about when and how to rebuild or where they're going to relocate some dining services. So all those pieces of information might help you write a present tense lead that says something like, fire officials are sifting through the remains of the student union food court on the campus of Ole Miss. So that's present tense. They're still going through the debris. Future tense, Ole Miss officials expect to see a new student union food court built by the end of the fall semester. So that talks about in future tense, what will happen with this story. So the key again is to ask yourself what's happening now or what's likely to happen. Number 4 is write in short declarative sentences. So this is a great opportunity for those of you who really know how to communicate precisely and concisely. So it's one idea per sentence. We very seldom use complex or compound sentences in broadcast. It's okay to use one here or there because it varies up the pace of the story, but for the most part, you want to be concise as possible, and most importantly, you want to eliminate unnecessary words. So this is where you edit yourself. In your first story, I spent a lot of time eliminating unnecessary words. Many of you were writing almost as if you were preparing an essay for an English assignment. So editing yourself is important regardless of what platform you're writing for, but in broadcast, it's absolutely essential. So the fifth and final characteristic of good broadcast writing is that you should write in active voice. Now, what is active voice? Well, your English teacher, your grammar teacher would say it's when the subject of the sentence performs or causes the action expressed by the verb. So how do I make that conversational for you? Well, I think it's easiest to do by example. So if I say to you, the ball was hit by the boy, what's the subject of that sentence? Ball, right? So the ball is not performing the action. The action is being performed on the ball. So if I flip that sentence and I say the boy hit the ball, now the subject is performing the action. Now a lot of students tend to confuse active and passive with past tense and present tense. Really has nothing to do with tense at all. You can put something in past tense and still make it active. Okay, another little word about attribution, because we've talked a bit about this as it relates to text, but in broadcast, attribution often comes first. So according to the provost's office, classes will be canceled. So you are attributing the fact that classes will be canceled to the provost's office, and you're putting it first. Same thing here. The mayor thinks the changes will help the economy. The reason why you put attribution first is it helps the broadcast audience understand the source of the information before they hear the information. So it helps them kind of vet the credibility of what you are reporting. So one thing I would suggest that you do is to start to listen to broadcast news in a different way. And we're going to click here on NPR's hourly news summary and listen for just a little bit for some of the characteristics that we've just been talking about.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder. The two sides in the war in Ukraine have conducted a prisoner swap and say they're preparing to pull heavy weapons from the front line as part of their internationally brokered ceasefire deal. But NPR's Corey Flintoff reports that fighting is still going on in some areas.
Russian-backed militias in eastern Ukraine say they'll start to withdraw weapons such as artillery and rocket launchers from the front line on Sunday.
Okay, so we just heard a bunch of present tense, are preparing, a little bit of future tense, will be withdrawing weapons on Sunday. So you notice how all of this terminology is being used in order to create a sense of urgency, a sense of what's happening now.
Ukrainian government officials say they also plan to begin withdrawing heavy weapons, but didn't say when the withdrawal will start. Ukraine says the separatists and their Russian allies are still attacking Ukrainian positions near.
Okay, lots of present tense there. The other thing that you notice is that broadcast tends to use that word says. So again, it's in present tense, says, not said.
The southern port city of Mariupol. Shelling continues in several areas despite a week-old ceasefire. The government charges that separatist and Russian forces are violating the ceasefire in a bid.
So the government charges that separatist forces are violating the ceasefire. So putting it in active voice, telling us who is saying that this is happening.
Bid to gain more territory in eastern Ukraine. Corey Flintoff, NPR News, Moscow.
The Turkish military swept into Syria overnight. Turkey's prime minister says the military launched an operation to rescue Turkish soldiers from northern Syria. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports that a tomb Turkey considers sacred has also moved closer to the border with Turkey.
Throughout the conflict in Syria, Turkey has kept dozens of soldiers near Aleppo to guard what Turks consider sacred ground, the tomb of Suleiman Shah, the grand...
Okay, so here's an example. The anchor in leading into the reporter's story could have mentioned that tomb by name, but instead said a tomb that the people consider sacred, because it would be very difficult for someone who doesn't know anything about that culture to know what the heck that tomb was about. So that's an example of being conversational. So we won't do any more of this, but this is the kind of thing I think that will help you understand how these key characteristics come into play in your own writing by listening critically to what others are doing in the broadcast medium. All right, so let's give it a little shot right now. If you want to do this for yourself and pause this lecture to see what you come up with before you see what I'm about to reveal to you, that might be a good idea. So here's a story about a malaria drug that is becoming less effective. So you'll notice here in the story is losing its efficacy. Now, I know you all are college students, so efficacy may be a word that just rolls off your tongue, but I can guarantee you that there are plenty of people who might be listening to a story that aren't going to know that word. So that would be one that I would immediately try to simplify. This is based on a story written in the New York Times, and you'll see that this lead, the first sentence, is quite lengthy and includes a lot of information. So, the world's best drug for treating malaria, a medicine that is key to saving millions of lives in Africa and beyond, is losing its efficacy in a much larger swath of territory than was previously known, according to research that was released Friday. So, the broadcast version of this, number one, needs to be a lot shorter, because just listening to that, you can get lost pretty easily in what is being said. Secondly, you want to make any complicated terms or words that aren't commonly used, you want to simplify those. You also want to consider that if the attribution is important, that you would put it first. You might be able to go without attribution until the second sentence, because one of the things that you want to do with good broadcast writing is grab someone's attention. So grabbing attention with, according to research from the Lancet Infectious Diseases Medical Journal, is not going to be a real zinger for most people listening. So, but when you go to attribute, it's a good idea to put that attribution first. You want to make it obviously written for the ear, and think about what somebody's going to be able to grasp just by quickly listening to it, and of course put it in active voice. So give it a shot. Pause this lecture if you want to try writing your own version of this. If not, I will just move on and you can see what I've come up with. So my suggestion for how you might approach this for a broadcast story is to say, the world's best malaria drug is no longer working as well as it used to. Okay, so this is in present tense, is no longer working. It's active voice. The drug is the subject of the sentence. It is no longer working. It's much shorter. The New York Times lead was 43 words long. This one is 15. Much more conversational instead of efficacy. I'm just saying that it's not working as well. Written for the ear. You should be able to understand this just by listening one time. Okay, so let's try another one here. Whew, just looking at this one, you know it's going to be a challenge. So here's what was written in the text version of this story. A Taliban-claimed suicide attack killed 14 people, including 3 NATO soldiers, and injured 37 civilians in eastern Afghanistan following a weekend in which the U.S. death toll in the conflict surpassed the 2,000 mark and continued to raise concerns over insider attacks by Afghan forces on Western troops. All right, so this is a wonderful example of why trying to answer the who, what, when, why, where, and how in the first paragraph in the lead can lead to less understanding for the audience. And it's absolutely the case when it comes to broadcast. I would even say this could be a stronger text lead if this had been broken into a couple of sentences, if not more. So the other thing for broadcast is it's hard to keep lots of numbers in your head all at once. So I would choose the most important number from this paragraph, which is probably how many people died, and put that in my lead versus trying to cram all of this information in. You also have to boil it down to what exactly happened. So we talked before about how important the what is in terms of getting that into the lead. So what happened? There was a Taliban claimed suicide attack. Other pieces of this information you may decide are essential to the lead, but using those two pieces of information, what happened and how many people were killed, I would suggest that you could write a better broadcast lead than this, although of course this was not intended to be a broadcast lead. So give it a shot if you want, or just go ahead and keep listening and we will reveal what I came up with as an option. So in my broadcast lead, I said the Taliban is taking responsibility for a bomb that killed 14 people and injured dozens in Afghanistan. I think that it was important to know where this happened. I think the fact that there were people were injured was also relevant, but not necessarily the exact number. Because remember, we're trying to limit the number of specific numbers that you use in the headline. So this is present tense, is taking responsibility. It's short compared to the text lead, which was 48 words long. Much more conversational and written for the ear. So this is something you could absorb by just listening to it once. So the best broadcast writers exercise selection, not compression. So they don't try to cram all the information they know into one or two sentences. They try to select the most important details to share with the audience. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll be working on how to select the most important details from the information you gather and present it in broadcast style. You'll still be writing text versions of your story, but adding to that, you will also be writing a broadcast companion piece to the story 2 that you're working on.